everybody in the world of paleoanthropology community fans. Today we're here with Rebecca Ragsites, author of the new book Kindred, which will be debuting in the United States October 27th. Today we're going to be talking to her about her book, her life, her work, and of course, Neanderthals. So why don't we start out with just a quick introduction about who you are and why we are talking today. Like, what got you to where you are?
Well, thanks very much for having me on. I guess what got me where I am, I'm one of those archaeologists that was really into old stuff when they were a kid. You know, they were picking around dead bones and things on holiday, and digging stuff up in my garden. So I think, yeah, like an interest in the past definitely goes way back for me. And also it was quite funny, a friend of mine from my childhood who I used to live next door to got in touch just after the book was out, and she was like, oh, I remember you from back in the day, you're always thinking about telling stories and things. So that kind of desire to write stuff has been there as well, actually, although professionally my career has definitely been, for the most part, very focused on archaeology and in academia and sort of scientific research. That part that was sort of aiming towards some sort of book was probably always there.
Yes.
Okay, so
awesome.
in terms of what I started out, I was although in the UK we don't have the option to do archaeology like at high school, and it did used to be there, although it wasn't at my school. So I chose to do for like my pre-university qualifications, I did French, English literature and ancient history. So that was the oldest I could manage, was like Rome and classical Athens. And then I went to University at Bristol and did an undergraduate in archaeology there. And I chose Bristol partly because they had a rock art course, and I like the sound of that.
Very nice, yes.
Yeah. And then I just got more and more interested in, the older the stuff, the more intriguing it was for me. Although I love, all archaeology, I'm not one of those people that sort of hates on the recent stuff. Even industrial archaeology, I like that as well. But no, like the Paleolithic was really, calling to me, and so I went and did a master's at Southampton, which included fantastic training in lithic analysis, and then I did a PhD at the University of Sheffield on the last Neanderthals in Britain. So that's kind of my route pre sort of where I am now, although I did a postdoc as well in France, but we can talk about that separately.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that is an amazing journey, and it sounds like you must have overcome many challenges, and just as you travel deeper into time, it sounds like your love for archaeology just grew, and you just found what you really were passionate about.
I mean, I think although not all Paleolithic archaeologists or paleoanthropologists will admit it, a lot of us have read the Jean Auel books, the Clan of the Cave Bears,
Yes.
and the Earth's Children series. And if you read that as a teenager, it's quite formative. And although I think the thing that really struck me most about those books, I loved the story, and it felt quite awesome to have a girl as the central character and all of that, but it was Auel's evocation of the Pleistocene world that really was just like blew me away. The detail that she went into in describing the environment and all of the different technological aspects, sort of the different day-to-day life. What was it to be a hunter-gatherer in that period? And she put so much effort into that, and that sort of passion for the deep past definitely was sparked by her. But yeah, I didn't really sort of realize that till a bit later, when I was about 18, I guess. So it's that was really good. But I mean, I wouldn't say I had many sort of, I don't know, barriers or anything. You know, I wasn't a first generation person to go to university, although it was sort of more, my dad went and did languages at university as a teacher, and one of my grandfathers was a historian, you know, so there was some sort of history of sort of higher education in my family, and so that was, you know, I didn't have that kind of barrier at all. But I think in terms of how you deal with sort of archaeology itself as a barrier, you know, the fact that the further back in time you go, the less physical evidence you have,
Yes.
That's definitely been a challenge in terms of honing my own thinking about stuff as well. In that when I did my PhD at Sheffield, I was in a cohort of other students who were mostly not studying the Paleolithic. They were studying later prehistory or even more recent, and they were very into like theoretical archaeology and, you know, like applying different social ideas and things to the past. And I started off very like, oh, we can't do that, we can't prove any of this stuff for like Neanderthals. But over time I got more open to taking those views really, and certainly through the work of Clive Gamble as well. You know, he was a real pioneer doing that for the Paleolithic as a whole, and I think he has continued to be through many of his publications. And so those ideas are what I have ended up trying to pursue with the book, to give people a really sort of deep dive into some of the details of the archaeology itself, but also show that we can kind of create broad webs of inference between different kinds of data. So we're not making stuff up, but we're sort of bringing different realms of evidence together, I think.
Yes, I fully agree. And I think the more that we do that, and the more open-minded and realize that Neanderthals may not have been so different from us, the more we accept that these things were possible, and that, you know, they weren't these completely alien beings to us. So I think that does play a large role. And I'm really glad that you brought up Clan of the Cavebear, because I was actually going to ask you a question or two about it, because
it's in my acknowledgements in the book.
So before we continue, I guess I'll wrap myself out. I'm still reading your book. As you know, I'm in the United States. Your book is not out yet technically. I'm reading it on Kindle, which it has released on.
Yes.
So I have not completed it yet. I am in the process of reading it. It is absolutely wonderful, and I'm just going to tell everyone right now to go out and read it. Before we even talk about it, I'm just going to tell everyone to go read it. But I'm really glad that you brought up Clan of the Cavebear, because I was going to ask a question or two about it, because it is a series that I think has captivated so many people, including myself, and even non-paleoanthropologists like my mother, who grew up on it. You know, how accurate do you think some of that was?
Well, it's tricky, because some of the things that Jean Owl sort of, I mean, the basic stuff that she wrote about, like stone tool technology, how you actually nap flint, that doesn't change, you know, although I have to say I spent years being confused by what a striking platform actually was until I did a course in stone tool technology at university, and it's very visual. You actually, you know, just reading that is quite confusing. So I have tried to really make it clear in the book, because that I found that confusing as, you know, as a youngster when I was reading about that. But other than that, when she's talking about, you know, the basics of how you sit down and you have a core and you have a stone and, you know, you nap and all that, that hasn't changed at all really, and that's not going to. And most of the stuff that she had in terms of the environment, that's very similar. I don't think that's changed. I think the period during which she writes about, I think it's about 32,000 years ago, that's said. I could reach for my copy on the shelf and check, but I won't. But I think it's 32,000-ish. I think perhaps we might say it was slightly colder now. than she has it in sometimes, but only a little bit. But in terms of other things, I would say certainly for her representation of the Neanderthals, that's always been an interesting question, because I think she got, you know, flack at the time for making them,
right.
you know, quite sort of hippie, and, you know, in some ways, although there are some very brutal characters in there.
Right.
But I think she deserves a lot of credit for actually giving them characters, you know, that they're not just like clone hominins, they are individuals. And I think that's something that we would definitely be more open to thinking about, you know, that Neanderthals individually had their own motivations, their own skill sets, and their own characters and things, and not only within a group, but we should see Neanderthals as a broad entity, not as some kind of homogeneous sort of blob. You know, they lived across a massive range of environments, and you know, what some of them in Wales were doing would have looked very strange to the ones in Uzbekistan and things like that, you know. So I think that idea of Neanderthal, I guess, richness and diversity is interesting, and she was sort of touching on that with her characters, but also with the different groups, that she does have different cultural traditions and different social, I think, perspectives between some of her Neanderthal groups. So that's interesting. But in terms of sort of how they communicated, in her book she was quite conservative about giving them sort of language, really, and they do make sounds, but most of their communication is via gesture. You know, quite subtle, rich communication, but it's gesture based, with sort of names, I think, are sounds, and then they sort of add sounds to give meaning and stuff. So I think we would probably be a bit more likely to say that Neanderthals talked. They had speech of some sort, but the kind of language, you know, whether we could even say language, I don't know. I mean, what we have now is that the anatomical evidence is a lot stronger, which points to basically that they could produce almost the same range of sounds based on sort of where the voice box is. It doesn't look like they had really bad breath control, you know, like that allows me to make a very long sentence and keep putting words on and I don't need to take a breath. People used to say, oh, maybe they couldn't do that, but I think that's less sort of clear now. But I think for me, one of the key points is the evidence from the internal ear anatomy, which is interesting because it's not exactly like ours, but there's some really cool work that's been done that's basically modeled the frequencies it would have been most tuned into, and they're the same as ours, and ours are tuned into speech, you know, human speech. So that's very strong evidence that some kind of vocal communication was very important to them. But again, what they actually talked about, that's a big, we can't really say the level of detail in their language, and that's very difficult. But so I think that's one thing that's different. And I think something else that she had right was the interest in plants. One of the main characters in those books, for people who potentially listeners who don't know the story, which would be shocking in your listeners if they don't know it. The main character, Ayla, is a Homo sapiens girl who gets lost during an earthquake when she's only like about 3, I think, and she gets taken in by a Neanderthal tribe. And one of the people who take her in is like a more elderly woman called Isa, who is like sort of like the healer of the tribe, but she knows all about plants, so edible plants but also medicinal plants, and there is reams of sort of information on Eurasian plant species that you can eat, and you know, like how you learn how you identify it, how you pick it, how you prepare it. So I used to love all that. It was amazing, and I'm still really into sort of wild plants and foraging and stuff. But in terms of modern understanding of Neanderthals, that's definitely way more sort of mainstream than it appeared when Jean Auel wrote those books. It was still very much, the archaeology was like, well, they just hunted big stuff, or in fact, did they even hunt big stuff, or were they just skulking around other carnivores' kills? And there was a big debate, or were they just scavengers? That over time changed very much towards the fact that we know they were top trophic level predators. There's no question that in whatever environment they were in, they were taking the best of the animals around them, and that might be mammoth or roe deer, depending on the environment you're in,
right.
or even smaller things, rabbits or whatever. If it suited the ecology, then they would do that. But their capacity as hunters is really quite clear now, and I do sort of go into that in the book, but the plant aspect has dramatically shifted because we've got so many more sort of analytical methods than we used to have, that we can actually see that evidence, whereas we couldn't previously.
That is amazing. Yeah. I think there's just, as you just talk, there's just so many questions running through my head. One thing that you mentioned that brought to my mind is so they're apex predators. A lot of people, I think, have known or thought this, for a while now. But one thing that, and I don't know, again, because I haven't finished it, if you talk about it or not, the common idea for decades has been that Neanderthals could not throw spears, that their anatomy did not allow them to. And again, I don't know if you addressed this, but is that still the idea, or could Neanderthals actually throw projectiles, or were they mainly just...
I think the best evidence that the anatomy is not quite telling us everything is the spears from Schöningen, this site in Germany. It's about 330,000 years old. And those spears were discovered in 1995 or 97, okay. I think, maybe published 97. But those spears are very long, and they appear to be weighted in exactly the same way as javelins are. They look like throwing spears. They make most sense as throwing spears. There's one very much longer there as well, which is potentially a sort of a lance that you would hold, but it's much longer. And these spears were used for hunting horses. At Schöningen, there's at least 50 horses. That's probably from multiple different hunts through at least decades, maybe a century or something like that. But those spears don't look like the oldest spear still, I think, from Clacton in eastern Britain, and that one is over 400,000 years old, and that is much sturdier looking. There's also another spear which presumably is a Neanderthal one, which is younger, which is from about 120,000 years at Leringen in Germany. And that looks like the really long, hefty one from Schöningen. And that was found associated with an elephant carcass. So that one may be another, like a lance that you would use to finish something off. And especially with an elephant, you do not want to get close to a dying elephant. So perhaps, I think we should expect that their technologies varied according to the kind of environments they were in. And Leringen is a forest environment. It's when it was warmer even than it was today. So the kind of hunting you can do in a forest, javelins are going to be pretty useless. You're not going to have the range for that in most kinds of forest environments. Whereas at Schöningen, it's around a lake site. There is some coniferous forest, but it seems on environmental evidence to be more open, and it's colder. It's clearly colder. So I think overall, we need to combine anatomy with what we see in the archaeology. And as far as I understand it, those spears from Schöningen are definitely understood as throwing spears. The most recent evidence we have is interesting because it's another of these warm period forest sites from Neumark Nord, another German site, and this was published a couple of years ago. This is two fallow deer, stags that were hunted, and like the bullet holes are basically there, like there is the holes in their bones.
Amazing.
And like there was experimental work done, and those holes are only really explained by spears, but they did very cool analysis, and in that case again it looks like those are not spears that were thrown. The angle is wrong. It looks like they were sort of shoved in from below and up, basically, which would make sense again because this is a forest environment. So although the species is different, it's not an elephant, it's deer, it looks like perhaps they were just not using throwing spears in that period. So yeah.
And you mentioned that they would have had, as far as vocals, the same range that we do based on their inner ear anatomy. Now, I think you're probably aware of the older, I think it's BBC.
Oh God, yes, I know that.
Yes. I have been asked, I don't know how many times in preparation for this interview, how do Neanderthals talk? So you're saying they were not restricted to just a high-pitched?
I don't think anybody has done more recent work on that specific question since that documentary. But I think the understanding is that the range of vowel sounds might have been slightly more restricted, but in terms of did they sort of have this ridiculous kind of sound, I don't know. I can't really imagine them sounding like that, but maybe that's just my lack of imagination. I don't know.
Okay, yes, many people will be happy that I asked that. Okay, so what made you, after all your research and getting your degrees, and you said, you weren't really intending to write a book, but it was always kind of there. What made you finally put pen to paper and just sit down and write this book?
Well, weird contexts of like life and how things happen. I had, like a lot of people after their PhDs in the past like 10 years, I didn't have like immediate success in getting a postdoc, because it's super hard everywhere. The funding is very difficult. I did get a postdoc which started 3 years after my PhD, so I had a long period where I was doing work. I was involved in projects, for example, the La Côte de Saint-Brelade project in Jersey, which is still ongoing. Their work there, it's really cool, but that wasn't funded, so that was difficult for me to actually do much beyond go on the excavations and try and help that way. But after that, I applied for a European funded postdoc, which pre-Brexit, British people were eligible for, which basically it's a centralized funded thing in Europe, which encourages people to move to different countries to do 2 or 3 year postdocs to basically get experience outside their home country, get new training, go to new labs, learn languages, and just bring that richness potentially to a third country or back to your original country, whatever. But it's a fantastic scheme. It's a real shame that the UK is going to now lose out on that. So I went to France, and I initially didn't think I was going to get that because I applied in 2012, and then I found out that I was just 6 below like the ranking to get in, because it covers the whole of Europe. It's like thousands and thousands of people apply.
Oh wow.
So I nearly got it, and I was like, oh okay, so what am I going to do? But then a few months later, after I'd reconciled myself, I wasn't going to do it. They have a bouncing down system where if people above you pull out because they have another grant or something, then they offer it to you. So 6 other people above me pulled out, and then I was offered it. So that was, a big turnaround. Suddenly I was able to go. So I started that in 2013. and went over to Bordeaux. I was at the Passea laboratory, which is a fantastic lab. There's just tons of amazing archaeological research that comes out of there, and they are, you know, world renowned for the Paleolithic. So that was brilliant to go there and meet so many, you know, fantastic colleagues. But after that postdoc was finished, I took a little bit longer because I had a child during that, so I had maternity leave. It just extended it by like 4 months. I applied for lots of stuff, but I didn't get anything else, and it was really difficult. But I stayed in France for a couple of years while I was applying, and during that point, just when I started the postdoc, actually, I had been approached by Bloomsbury, my publishers, to write a book about humanity and birds in prehistory, because I like birds, I like bird watching, and so they were interested in that, and there was talk, oh, you know, maybe you could write one about Neanderthals. So I said, no, I don't want to do the Neanderthal one first because it's too scary, because it's too massive. But then for various reasons, we put the bird one on hold. And when I finished the postdoc in 2015, we changed it and got a new contract sorted for the Neanderthal one. So I really only started writing that properly in early 2017, spring 2017. So it took me 3 years to write the book, basically. I was doing other stuff, but I never got another academic post, although actually I retained my affiliation with Bordeaux, so I'm still a chercheur bénévole, which is like an honorary fellow, and I've just actually got an honorary fellowship at Liverpool as well, which has a really fabulous, thank you, for they have a fantastic Paleolithic research group there, so I'm really pleased to be affiliated with them as well. But in terms of like actual academic jobs that paid me, I didn't get anything else after that, and so I had to make a decision. You know, I knew I had to come back to the UK, because either I would have to go to a third country, by which point I already had 2 small children, and Germany would have been a good option, but I didn't want to move us again, and I wanted to come back home so that we could maintain stronger family ties, you know, with my family in the UK. So really there was no other option. I nearly got a position in the States, actually.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that came quite close. I mean, that was brilliant to be shortlisted for that, and I didn't get interviewed, unfortunately, in America, but I had to do it by Skype. But yeah, so after all those things didn't really work out, it seemed to me that I should pursue what I was realizing I was quite good at, which was writing for a public audience. You know, I had done some articles in The Guardian, Scientific American, in their blogs, and I also started with 3 other women. We co-founded the Trailblazers project, and that also happened during my postdoc. And so I was also, while I was writing this book, running our Raising Horizons project, which was a massive portrait exhibition, really amazing photographic portraits of like contemporary women researchers in archaeology and earth sciences, modeling, you know, like posed as their historic sort of forebears, and that was brilliant. So that was a really
cool,
and that really showed me that actually this whole creative side of me that I hadn't really nurtured since school, you know, that I really liked that still, you know, because I nearly went to art college actually instead of going and doing archaeology. So that sort of chance to write a book, although it was really intimidating to write an entire book about Neanderthals and sort of be like, okay, I've got to write I wanted to make it really definitive so that it was going to basically cover everything you might want to know about Neanderthals, but in a very accessible way, so it was not going to overwhelm people with information, but that I could use my ability to write and my scientific expertise to kind of just pull out threads of data and themes, and sort of try and weave that together and give people a really 21st century understanding of Neanderthals. So that's kind of how I ended up writing it, basically.
Okay. Well, that is definitely an amazing journey, and I'm so glad that you went on it because, like I've already said, I am just so much enjoying this book. And it's, I keep telling everyone, like, this is the Neanderthal book. Like, if you want to know about Neanderthals, this is the book to pick up because this is going to have the most updated information. It's going to have the most, you know, new theories, ideas, hypotheses, things like that. It's going to have the newest stuff in it, collected from all over. And I've heard, you know, I first heard about you and your book from Professor Lee Berger.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because I've interviewed him as well, and we've chatted a few times. So I saw his post about it, and I'm like, oh, well, this looks really interesting. So I did a little research and found you and your book, and so here we are today. But just, yeah, it's very, I love how each chapter starts with like that little, like, almost story-esque.
Yes.
Um,
Short stories.
that takes you
poems.
back. I love it, and it just sets the stage, and it's perfect, and I'm really enjoying it. What do you think was the greatest challenge in writing the book?
Making myself delete loads of it because it was too full of information, and you know, when you're coming from a scientific background and you're used to writing scientific papers where you have to back up all of your claims with, you know, not only citations, but you kind of have to reference every case that you know of to make it clear that you are correct in saying what you're saying. That means that you have a tendency to, I guess, try to shoehorn 10,000 examples of everything in, and I did that. And so, like, the original, like the first manuscript draft was like 250,000 words. It was bonkers. It was
Wow.
enormous. It was enormous. So I had to let go of that sort of worry and actually just say, no, I know what I'm talking about. And you know, I'm not trying to prove that I know what I'm talking about to people. I'm trying to just communicate what I know. So that's, you know, that's the difference. And I did choose explicitly to not fill it with references, or, you know, like referenced footnotes, or even to provide a big bibliography, because the bibliography would have been so massive. I kind of just thought, you know, I didn't want to provide selected papers for each chapter because actually it would have been really hard to do it. So I kind of went halfway and provided an online bibliography, which is still actually needs some work doing on it because there's stuff that I haven't put in. And I know the formatting is a bit dodgy in places, but I mean, basically a lot of my reading is in there. You know, it's ridiculous amounts of papers and books that are on there, and people can just look at that. I've made it a Google Doc, so it's accessible. But I also didn't want to write it like a lot of popular science books are written, where, you know, people give the names of researchers, because it breaks the text up so much to sort of say, oh, this person and this person at this laboratory at this university. And that was a difficult choice. That was actually, you know, that was really hard, because again, in science, you're trained to cite people and acknowledge their work. But the book was already massive. And I realized if I was going to actually, you know, write it like that, it would, I find personally that I just skip over those words and names anyway. And I didn't want to put people off by making the text dense in that form. So rather than doing that, I put a note at the beginning saying, I've not included everybody's names. You know, a lot of these people are my colleagues and my friends, but it's not because I don't respect their work. It's because I want to make this book as accessible as possible for people. And a lot of readers, I think, are put off. You know, there are readers that have already complained to me and say, oh, I really miss having a massive bibliography at the back. And those kind of people can go and find that information online, and they will. But other people who might not want to read an academic-y flavoured book, I don't want to put them off learning about Neanderthals. So I chose to have this, you know, quite an unusual sort of just a narrative about the Neanderthals themselves is really what I was going for. And then I did decide quite early on to put in the creative writing parts, just because I guess that's me. I've always been interested in stories and poems and things like this, and I have a really visual response to reading about archaeological data. I can't help but visualize the lakeside
Yeah.
where the Schoeningen horses are, and all of this.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so it was, I suddenly kind of just thought, no, I'm going to do it. It's my book. I'm going to try it, and
Yeah,
my editor didn't say no.
definitely. Yeah.
So, and also that I'm not the first person to do that in archaeology. There are Mark Edmonds wrote a really fantastic book called Ancestral Geographies of the Neolithic, which I read years ago, and he does these like little vignettes at the beginning of the chapters, and I really liked that. So there have been people who've inspired me to do it for sure. So that kind of, that's where that came from, really.
Okay. Well, I definitely love those aspects. I think they really help tie in the general story and just make things flow very nicely. And I think one of the big things that we try to do at World of Paleoanthropology is, I think, very aligned with the way you wrote your book, and that's to get the information out to a general populace. Not to just focus to the people who are scientifically inclined, but rather the people who are just interested but might not be classically trained in, scientific method.
Yeah, exactly.
And your book does that. And I think
I'm really glad.
It hits the mark. And I think anyone, who can, has a decent reading level can pick it up and enjoy it and learn from it and learn a great deal from it. You don't have to have this background in science to appreciate it. And I think that's great. And I think it's great for the field as a whole. And I think a lot of anthropologists should consider writing more towards the public instead of their colleagues and future students and things like that.
I mean, I think it's difficult. You have to have the inclination to do it, but
yes,
I think the problem is that not everybody wants to write a book like this, and that's completely fair. But I do think that more people could do, for example, what Lee Berger does with making a lot of effort to bring his excavations and his lab out to people, because that's the great privilege of working in this field. You are allowed to touch stuff that most other people only see behind glass, and the excitement of working in the field, what it actually feels like to crawl in a dark cave, to sort of see the dirt, and then to sit in the lab and fiddle around with something, that's our daily experience. And I think a lot of people forget how privileged they are that that's their daily stuff. Of course it gets boring if you sit in your lab and you're measuring the 10,000th stone artifact. That moment is boring, but when you remember what it is you're actually holding, that's amazing. And so I think even if not everybody is going to have the taste or the interest to write a book like this, and there's certainly a market for the more sciencey,
definitely, of course,
those kind of books. But I think certainly a lot of people could really consider things like, actually having a live stream from their site and stuff like that, because why not? I mean, your site is okay that there's issues, you don't want to have your embargoed publication revealed and all this, but you would still be in control. And I think it would be really fantastic if fieldwork and lab work was opened up more in the way that Lee Berger and some other projects do, and I mean, I met Lee a long time ago. I dug in South Africa with him years and years ago.
that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, being in Africa, South Africa was an amazing experience, completely different landscape. It was fantastic.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, and from the perspective of my work with trailblazers and sort of highlighting women in archaeology, again, those projects that Lee runs are very good for that. They,
Yeah,
and Lee has
definitely.
supported trailblazers as well. So I think that's that sort of willingness to see beyond your own research actually is something that the field could do with adopting a bit more widely. And rather than kind of thinking, oh, that's someone else's job. Well, I think maybe it would be good to find a way to make it your job. Find a thing that you like, a way to do this that will bring what you do to the people who fund your work.
Yeah, I think paleoanthropology, anthropology in general, and archaeology, it's one of those fields where it's like maybe not so much today, but in the past, definitely in the past, you would find something and that would almost become yours, and you would get all the rights to the research, and you would be the one to publicize and produce your work, and when you were done, other people could look at it.
Exactly.
Whereas today, like what Lee is doing, we're going along the journey with him. And I think if more people did that, the field would just benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I know I benefit as a professional. Like, for example, John Hawkes, his blog, I've read that for years, and I know 90% of the time if there's a new exciting thing that's out, I know he's going to write about it. So I benefit from having his perspective as well as reading the papers, and certainly for someone like me who for a long time has not been in an academic department, like physically based in one, that's really important to keep touch with the research community via the networks on social media, but also the material that's put out that is more new media focused, blogs and sort of vlogs or whatever. But I mean, there are a lot of people that do good work like this. I do think it could be better, more widely sort of appreciated as important. And yeah, I think it would benefit the field a lot, and obviously it would benefit the people who are interested in it, who are not sort of professionally working in it.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think unless you have anything you would like to close with, we will let you go because it's been about an hour now, I think. And I don't want to keep you too long. I would love to talk to you all day, though. So if you have anything you'd like to add, please feel free to just start talking. But I don't want to keep you, all day.
I don't think I have anything else to say, no.
But it's been an absolute delight meeting you and talking to you.
Thank you. You
and
too.
I have learned so much about just, the ancient world just from talking to you today, but from your book, which again, Kindred, everyone needs to pick it up and read it. If you want to learn about Neanderthals or paleoanthropology or anything of the like, Rebecca Ragg-Sykes, author, October 27th, I believe, is the release date in the United States. Pick it up. You won't regret it.
It's going to be reviewed in some big papers and stuff, so people will probably see reviews.
Awesome. Yeah. And for our fans, I will be putting out a small little review. I know that doesn't compare to the big ones, but it'll be fun. And yeah, so just again, thank you so very much for participating, and hopefully we will talk again.
Yes, yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you so much.
All right, you have a wonderful day.
You too.
Or
you too.
Evening, I should say.
Yes, yeah, the kids will be home soon.
All right, you have a good night.
Okay, bye-bye.